First and foremost, thank you so much, everyone, for being here this evening. That Julie was very excited to have this virtual event for a book that is particularly urgent in the times that we are living in. If you haven't already had a chance to pick up a copy of this amazing Wild House poetry book, Devil's Backbone is a morally urgent reckoning with American history, white supremacy, and the self. In this book, Julie Elmore confronts inherited cruelties, national hypocrisy, and personal responsibility with unflinching honesty. Her resonant diction, controlled musicality, and inventive forms uncover glimmers of mercy, transforming ordinary images, archival fragments, and historical voices into charged meditations.
For those of you who don't know Ava, Ava is our publicist for Wild House Poetry and has done a marvelous job in helping connect authors with audiences, readers, and negotiating all the fine tuning things of getting a book into print. I'm Mark Burrows, poetry editor of Wild House since the beginning of the press about 3.5 years ago. And we've been delighted to bring this book into print, Julie. It's a courageous book. You're a courageous voice. Your history, your own story is not without complications around your convictions and your public witness to justice and to righteousness, if I can use that old-fashioned word. And when I first read this collection, it was much larger when we first saw it. It had other parts to it. And I realized this section needed to be expanded as a separate volume, a separate collection, because in some ways, the time is urgent. I can't say that strongly enough. I'm preaching to the choir. You all understand what I'm saying. We're living in a time of massive denial of our historical legacies, the shadowed sides. And just on the eve of July 4th, when we're going to hear a lot of fiction about our history, it's important that a book like this gains the readership that it deserves. It's a book that should trouble the waters, our waters, all of our waters, and awaken us to recognize our responsibility and our opportunities to face this life differently. So, Julie, it's really an honor for us to bring this book out, and it will be a controversial book for some. It will be a healing book for others. And I'd like to invite you at the very beginning to reflect a little bit about the writing of this book. It didn't happen quickly. These are poems that have come over a long arc of time.
Yeah.
And some are very recent. Tell us a little bit about how the book happened.
Yeah, I will do that. And thank you. Thank you, Ava, for that introduction. And thank you, Mark, for taking this on. I actually want to start by reading the poem in section 1 called Bony Labyrinth, because that's where the story begins. That's where my writing begins. And this is a poem I wrote over 20 years ago after I taught at our nation's oldest private liberal arts HBCU, Historical Black College University, Wilberforce University in Wilberforce, Ohio. And I taught there for a decade, but I wasn't writing then. So I didn't have a writer's notebook where I was taking down things I was learning and observing and experiencing. But I wrote this poem later then, about 15 years after my first day at Wilberforce. And this is the one poem that made the cut from those years and after all this time. And I just want to start with this poem because, again, this is where my own awakening to my own whiteness began, was on this particular day, my orientation at Wilberforce. And the epigraph comes from Wilberforce University's website, an old web page, actually, which now I couldn't find when we were putting the book together because we like to credit everyone. So I actually had to put in the note that it's from a previous webpage. But it reads, founded in 1856, Wilberforce University, our nation's oldest private historically Black university, was formed to provide an intellectual mecca and refuge from slavery's first rule, ignorance. Bony Labyrinth. Cochlea, vestibule, and semicircular canals discern our place among vertiginous spaces and dizzying motion, determine how we hear voices even in the margins, and maintain balance among surreal sensations. Like the day decades ago, I walked through a maze of freshmen awaiting registration. Mine, the only pale face among the black crowd, their eyes poring over my disquieting steps as if I were a skeleton at their feast. This was my orientation. I never felt so white. My head spun as words hummed and echoed through the hall. Wavering on the edge of a world I'd never known till then, I slipped off the axis of inbred ignorance. Oh, how they righted me and right me still. And I feel very rooted to that place, even though my last day teaching there was way back in 2000. And I learned I was a highly educated white woman who had 2 college degrees at that point, and I was very young, a very young and very green young woman right out of grad school from the University of Dayton, landing my first job. I thought I'd always teach high school like Dr. Henry here. That was the goal, but somehow I landed on the college level teaching, and Wilberforce was the place that hired me, and I taught there for 10 years. And it was an awakening for me, despite all my years of education, despite even having relatives who are educated, going to a renowned public high school in South Jersey where I grew up that was known for very rigorous education. And I had lots of classmates who went on to the Ivy Leagues and everything else. There was so much I just did not know. And I started to realize in those years there, everything I didn't know. And as you all know, the more you don't know, you start to learn. And then the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And that has really rooted me in humility too, because I realized there is so much more I am still learning. And also proximity is so key. These were not histories I was learning in books. I was learning them through art, through the Afro-American Museum that's still right there in Wilberforce University. And I was taken there, and then I just started taking my classes there. So I was learning through art, I was learning through music, and I was learning through my colleagues who were so patient with me and such beautiful human souls I was working with. And through my students taught me so much. And so, as I said, I started teaching at other schools when the new millennium began. And yet that experience really, I feel like the little ducklings, right? They can get imprinted if they interact with the human as a duckling. I think Modern Family had a whole episode about that at one point. But that imprinted on me, and it just would not let go. And so as I was teaching, I began to integrate into my teaching essays and art and work to introduce my students to the perspectives that I felt I had never been taught, because I didn't want my students being ignorant like I was, like graduating with a college degree or 2, and yet still and not knowing so much that there was to know. So all that leads us to the years then I begin writing poetry at the same time, because I'm late to poetry. I didn't get a degree in poetry. I didn't major in poetry. But I had 2 children and a master's degree in those early aughts. And that's when really I had always been writing and then stuffing things in drawers. And in the early aughts, I just thought I have to get serious about this. And that's a whole other story, but I won't take time to tell in terms of how that went. But in any case, after the Emanuel 9 were slaughtered by Dylann Roof in 2015, I kind of had a second awakening, if you will, and really thought I should be writing about this. Like I want to keep learning more, and I want to write about learning more, and I want to really continue to teach about this and write about this. And of course, as we know, Donald Trump was elected for his first term in 2016, and things have been, as Mark said, we're in a really, really rough time as far as many people losing their rights, and especially the attacks on Black and brown people, and now even disabled people and LGBTQIA people. So with all that to say, I began writing those poems. And in 2017, I landed in Angela Jackson Brown's writing workshop, which was being hosted at Anderson University in Indiana. She was invited to lead a workshop, and that changed my life because I was already thinking about writing about this, but I was scared. Like, I'll be clear about that. I felt intimidated. I felt unworthy. I felt a little bit like Moses. Nope, not me, Lord. Nope, can't do that. But I also felt like, gosh, like, who am I to take this on? Like, in a true sense, like, it's a big risk to take that on. It's a big thing. And I sat in Angela's workshop and she challenged us. She said, I want you to write from a perspective you've never written before. And Angela is the kindest, sweetest, most generous person. Seriously, Angela, you are, that you could ever meet, and especially to have as a teacher in a classroom. And yet she's also so strong because she goes, and here's an example. And she lifts this photograph of a KKK march in Gainesville, Georgia from 1992. And it depicts exactly what one of the poems in my book describes, where there's a toddler in a KKK outfit, in the sheets, in the hat. His mom's right there. They're marching down the street, and he's approaching an African-American officer who has his riot shield in front of him, and the little boy sees his face in the shield. And it's stunning. It's a stunning photograph. And of course, it's 1992. It's not 1942, or in the case of Indiana, as we know, our state's history, 1922, which would have been very fitting for our state. Because Indiana, for those of you who don't know, had the largest KKK numbers in the entire country in the 1920s. So there's a lot of history there. But in any case, she said, here's a photograph. Now write about a perspective that you're uncomfortable with. And of course, we all just wanted to write from the righteous perspective. we were all drawn to, let's write from the Black officer's point of view. But I was sitting there and it's like, well, I'm not going to write from a Black person's point of view, because how can I possibly represent that correctly? That seems too audacious. And I thought, but I can write from the white woman's point of view. And I may not be a member of the KKK, but I bet I know a little bit about what she's thinking, because I've been raised in whiteness. And at that point, I had enough awareness. So that's how really the book started, was with that poem from that workshop. And it's why Angela's here, because I have leaned on her. Before you, Mark, before you helped me cull the manuscript, Angela helped me cull the manuscript. Believe it or not, it was even longer before you saw it. And Angela said, look, do you know Frank X. Wright in Kentucky? Here's what you need to do with your manuscript. And I thought, oh man, I have to kill my darlings. But she was right. I did. I had to take them out, and they'll be in another book at some other point. So that's really how the book came together. And honestly, the more I wrote, the more I read, and the more I read, the more I wrote, and the more I lived and I moved. I ended up joining a multi-ethnic church here in Marion, learned all about Marion's history, some of which didn't make its way into the book because we used to have part of the Underground Railroad come through Marion, and we have a rich history of a free Black settlement here in Marion. But we also have the history of the 1930 infamous lynchings, which to this day really is something the city is trying to reckon with, and my church is trying to reckon with, because we're dedicated to racial justice. So all I can say is all these things influenced how I wrote the book and why I was writing the book. I kind of became obsessed with it all. And sometimes I went in too deep and too dark and had to pull myself back out. But like you said, Mark, our history has been glossed over too much in our nation, and the church's history too. Reading Jemar Tisby's books, who has been supportive and is just doing wonderful work, is kind of a modern day prophet, if you will. has revealed to me so much about how white supremacy has really been imprinted, speaking of imprinted, on the DNA of our nation and in our churches. And they're really, and I think Matthew's going to read Tornado Siren, but really it's a shape-shifting monster that just creeps over everything. And once you can see it, you can't unsee it. I have a very good friend, one of the poems in the book, I think Tanya's going to read, White Women's Tears, is dedicated to her. And she once told me, she said, it's kind of like being in the Matrix. And I always forget which pill you take when you go through the Matrix, but you take the blue pill, or is it the red pill? I can't remember. But once you have, and you go through that chute and you come out, you can't unsee it. Like I see it everywhere now. So of course I had to write about it. So I hope the book gets into, as John Lewis says, some good trouble. We need to be troubled. I'm a big believer in lamentation. We need to lament, and we need to treat racism like it is. It is wrong, and it needs to be repented over, and we need it. It's not going to go away on its own. And that's the same with anti-Semitism. It's the same with homophobia. It's the same with any form of prejudice. We really have to work at it. So that's it. I hope I didn't go too long. I was going to read Devil's Backbone too, but maybe we can end on that, since I know I have delightful friends and supporters here who are going to read poems too, and I want to yield to them.
Thank you so much, Julie. Going on into our esteemed readers and guests this evening, I will start off by introducing Angela Jackson Brown. Angela Jackson Brown is an award-winning writer, poet, playwright, and the director of creative writing at Indiana University, Bloomington. She also teaches in the Nassland Mann Graduate School of Writing at Spalding University in Louisville, Kentucky. She is the author of Drinking from a Bitter Cup, House Repairs, When Stars Rain Down, The Light Always Breaks, Homeward, and Untethered. House Repairs won the 2021 Alabama Library Association Poetry Award. When Stars Rains Down was a finalist for the 2021 Langham Prize, longlisted for the Granum Foundation Award, and shortlisted for the 2022 Indiana Authors Award. Angela is going to start off with reading Lone Ranger, which is on page 20.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And congratulations, Julie. I'm so proud of you. You did the thing.
Thank you, Angela.
All right. Lone Ranger. He could shoot the left hind leg off a contented fly sitting on a mule's ear at 100 yards and never ruffle a hair. Oklahoma legend about Bass Reeves. He'd always been my father's hero, though he never knew his name. Couldn't see that a black man's holster held the Colt 45's butt handle forward, Winchester sleeved in his scabbard. My father liked him the way he was portrayed, white on white, riding his gallant saddlebred to a perilous rescue, Tonto at his side, giving proof of the narrative most Americans proudly hailed. Dad didn't know about the real Ranger's run from slavery or his vast mastery of indigenous tongues. Couldn't imagine riding with him in Don's early light, where Seminole and Creek, Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw dwelt, their tears trailing behind him. Didn't know he had a memory like a daguerreotype, learning every warrant by heart when read aloud by officer or judge. Dad just loved how the masked man always drew first, a bright star outshining outlaws by the thousands. Loved how either hand would do, how he killed desperados only when he had to, each red glare his anthem into light. Loved how he was both genuous and blessing in disguise, bursting with law and order like, what else? Bombs in air. His radio and TV got the silver all wrong. There was no hi-ho, no unspent ammunition left behind when his job was done. No. Poor though he was, Bass Reeves slid silver dollars into victims' wallets as his claim to fame, flagging him as big-hearted as he was brave. Legend has it, He knew no master but duty. It was striped on his back like the Bible verses he'd recite when cuffing criminals, including his own murderous son. Shoot, with his many deputies, he tamed a whole God-forsaken territory. So by the end, he was neither hireling nor slave. Oh, how Dad wanted to be him. The cheap imitation, I mean. And so did every kid I knew, as we all pretended to be larger than life. Cap, gun, fire spangling summer days, puffs of smoke dissipating in heat. And the next poem is called Reading Lesson. In 5th grade, the year of our nation's bicentennial, my teacher pulled me out of class twice a week and sat me behind a machine to train me how to read with speed, to cure me of lingering over language. I'd lean forward, rest my forehead on the instrument while prose scrolled up the screen at a predetermined pace, no matter the story, eliminating the luxury of contemplation or daydreams, any possibility of poetry in my mind. Haste made letters loitering near margins dispensable, black blocks emerging from the system censored expressions it deemed insignificant, muting the words mandolins and flutes to force focus. I was supposed to comprehend something akin to meaning by ignoring every ostensible sign I saw that said, imagine that. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. It was a joy to hear you reading those poems.
Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Matthew Lee Henry, or MEH, who will read The Truth About Heaven on page 15, followed by Tornado Siren on page 44. MEH is the author of The Third Renunciation and Said the Frog to the Scorpion. He is editor-in-chief of the Wait Journal, a poetry editor at American Poetry Journal, and the creative nonfiction editor at Porcupine Literary.
It was a joy reading through this collection and blurbing it, and Julie, all the praise to you for this.
Thanks.
I'm a big fan of erasure poems, and so The Truth About Heaven is an erasure of segregation of the races is biblical and therefore Christ-like by Malin D. Watkins, THD, Baptist Life, Charlotte, North Carolina, circa 1957. The Truth About Heaven. Separation nation built white Christian culture. Reverse racial hatred. The age-old question has been properly asked, what constitution is infallible? Smart aleck liberals and Republican parties are controlled by the damning tonnage of rot. Hell is settled. In our text we learn, the white race determined the bounds of habitation in schools, churches, social life, employment, culture, or anything else. To prove the Christian fact, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit question why birds of a feather flock together. Common ordinary decency teaches that a chameleon seems false. Prophets are blind, trying to ditch the bridegroom. This is segregation. Study your Bible. This truth about heaven teaches that something is strange and peculiar about all those who pretend to believe. Brainwashed and retrobate as a whole, the white race is the only race in history to embrace Christianity and Satan. Since the devil will not change, wash. Sins spread. Tornado Siren. The epigraph. Unmoored from its original empirical underpinnings, particularly with respect to African Americans, Blackness has become the symbolic assailant. Dr. Janine Bell. Tornado Siren. Each Saturday at noon, they practice the drill. Trills shine in spring air like a child's high-pitched whine in a public spear where everyone can hear. So when the real storm arrives, We'll fly down basement steps or insulate ourselves in inner rooms to save ourselves. But what horn warned John Crawford III that fiddling with a BB gun in the middle of a Walmart aisle while chatting on his cell would be his siren song, full of sound and fury, signifying assailant? That 911 wouldn't bring aid, but grave in half a second flat. What bell rang for Breonna Taylor, who climbed into bed, reaching for her beloved, for a good night's rest, not knowing it'd be eternal and irredeemable? Oh, something wicked that way came and keeps on coming. It knows no caution and hides in plain sight. Sly and slick, it slithers through amber waves of grain, through the rock of ages. Did you see it funneling all its strength as it chased Ahmaud Arbery on the road, nipping at his heels, mowing him down? After, did you see its twisted tail slide across his fallen flesh and hear its overdue alarm, like Chimera used to roar, sent its white-tipped tongue wagging as it left?
You're hired, Matthew. You can read all my poems all the time. Oh, thank you for that. I don't know. I don't want to interfere, Ava, but should we talk about those 4 poems for a minute before we move on? I have things I could share about them if anyone's interested, or we can just keep going.
Let's pause and let's reflect with Angela and Matthew on the poems they chose.
So yeah, I have a question for both of you. Just why did you choose those 2 poems? That would be interesting, hopefully for everyone to hear.
Absolutely. So similar to you, I grew up in a household that I had a father who every Saturday, our tradition was to sit down and watch The Lone Ranger, and along with The Lone Ranger, any other Western that happened to come through the TV feed on that given Saturday. And I never challenged any of the history at that point in my life. I accepted that what I was seeing on the television screen was a true representation of history. I think it wasn't until I was a freshman in college when I really first encountered the fact that history was not a science, that it wasn't mathematics, that it was filtered through the minds of the people who researched or didn't research in some cases. And so when I saw this poem, it really made me think about my own dad, because had I even mentioned to him at the time that this was really about a Black man, he probably would have said, "Oh, you're just making that up, little girl." So this really sort of tapped into my own nostalgia. And it's also indicative of the fact that our histories all intersect in some ways. Many of us grew up with the same experiences, many of us very similar experiences. And I think those are the points of conversation. That's where we can meet. Not so much in the middle, but where we can at least have honest dialogue about what what the past means and what our present means. And then reading lesson, it was like reading about my own, struggles with language growing up. I didn't grow up around people with higher education. So it wasn't until I reached school that, I started to really focus in on how I sounded, and not wanting to sound Southern became sort of my mantra after a time, because I didn't hear people like my relatives or like me on television. I wanted to, so I became they called me the Black Barbara Walters, because I would try to imitate her in the way that I spoke. And it hasn't really been until lately that I decided that I like my slow talking self. So, so this is another one of those poems that just sort of spoke to me.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Angela. That means a lot to me. Obviously, from that poem reading lesson, you can tell I was put on that machine. I was reading slowly, and I wasn't comprehending everything I was reading. And I hated that machine. I was like, why is it forcing me only to see some words? Like, why is it really felt limiting. I don't know if it even worked. Like, I don't remember that part. I just remember eventually I didn't have to do it anymore. And I did do much better in school. Well, sixth grade was my turning point when I started to excel in school. But up until that time, I struggled. So yeah, I think it's important for us to say that, to be, yeah, I'm a poet, I'm a writer, but I struggled in school. And it had that national flavor too, because it was during the bicentennial, and kind of ironic, right? Because we're about to have this, what is it even called? The 250th. I'm sure there's some centennial language for it that I don't know. But I have very clear memories of 1776 to 1976 and all that going on there. And there I was trying to read, and there's a bit of metaphor there in that I want to see what's in the margins. And of course, that's become kind of my life mission in terms of who's marginalized. And I want to hear from those voices and see that. I was playing with the Lone Ranger too, because yeah, my dad was a huge fan. And it's not like I'm throwing shade on him. Like, he didn't know what he didn't know. I mean, that's kind of the point of the book. We don't know what we don't know. I mean, this is what we were conditioned to celebrate as heroic, and it was a cheap imitation, right? And so the phrases and words from the national anthem go throughout that poem because, and Devil's Backbone, the eponymous poem, plays with words and phrases from America the Beautiful. So yeah, I really appreciate that you talked about that. We had similar fathers, because yeah, that was a ritual, just watching that. And then of course we all played cops and robbers and wanted to be the Lone Ranger. So
I chose The Truth About Heaven. As I mentioned, I love erasure poems, and my favorite erasure poems are the ones where the choices that the author have made bring something new to light. And in this case, I just was thinking about O'Malon D. Watkins, and the response he probably would have if he were reading this poem, and he would be so unhappy. And that brought joy to my heart. And so I was like, yes, it's doing what it should do, because he would be like, oh, how dare you? So yeah, I love the language of how you chose it, and the message that comes across, especially because it would, he's turning over in his grave repeatedly, and that brings, joy to my heart. Tornado Siren, for those who don't have, like, the fact that the poem itself is also like a tornado spiral, and that the words that are in it, they're intertwined between literary allusions and references to Americana, and the racial tragedies that are upon it, and the sonics, like everything is like tightly woven together, just like a tornado is. And so when I read this originally, I was like, yeah, that right there, that's brilliant. I think hat tip that I don't have.
Thank you so much. That first one, this again is a connection just with my life. I read that essay by Malin Watkins, good Southern Baptist, again, an article published in a Baptist publication in the 1950s, right? It's not that long ago. People are still alive, right, that lived then. So, but because one of my fellow friends here in Marion is a history professor and scholar, and that his whole dissertation was on white evangelicals in the South. And so he was teaching us classes about that in the South, and he brought that article with him. And I just thought that article begs to be erased, because that guy goes on and says eternally, when George Wallace said, right, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, that was Malin Watkins. And that was the teaching of the church, that segregation would be forever, that heaven itself would be segregated. And I absolutely became an opportunist, because he forgot a comma where he needed one in his original sentence. And that's how I got the Christianity and Satan to be together like that, and not have to have this, the erasure space between it, because he forgot a very important comma between two independent clauses and that and there it was. I was like, well, I'm going to leave that the way it is. So yeah, I appreciate that. And Tornado Siren, John Crawford III was literally murdered in my backyard. That's where I used to live, the Walmart he was murdered in. That was the Walmart I used to shop at all the time. And that was chilling. And that was during this time where I was writing these poems. And it really rocked me. And to this day, going back into that store is very difficult. Because Ohio is an open carry state. So he did nothing illegal, absolutely nothing illegal. It was how he was perceived as an assailant. And of course, we know the tragedies of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor as well. So I appreciate that you read that. I do like to weave in Greek mythology wherever I can, all my classical education. So that shows up in a couple poems in Chimera. It just seems the perfect metaphor for white supremacy because it's shape-shifting and it has different faces and different beasts and is a terrifying creature in Greek mythology. So thank you for reading those.
I loved this little discussion break. I feel like we got to understand the poems even deeper. I think when you're reading poetry in this book, especially, there's so much you can connect to externally from the sources you referenced, Julie, but then hearing your personal ties to it and then your guests' personal connections to these poems, I really like that we took a break to discuss that. So we'll do that again once we have the next two readers come in and join. Up next, we have Marjorie Maddox, who will read What to Lay Down on page 72, followed by Easter Snow on page 73. Professor Emerita of English and Creative Writing at the Lock Haven campus of Commonwealth University, 2023 Monson Arts Fellow, a poetry editor of Present, and radio host of WPSU-FM's Poetry Moment. Marjorie Maddox has published 17 collections of poetry, including National Indie Excellence finalist and Illumination Book Award-winning Seeing Things, which came out with Wild House Poetry in 2025.
I'm trying, there we go. This is different than Zoom, so I'm having a little bit of a learning curve here. It's an honor to be here with Angela and Matthew and Tanya. And Matthew, I'm so glad you read Tornado Siren, because that was one that I was thinking about reading. And so it was wonderful to hear it in your voice. I taught, as Ava mentioned, I taught at a state university in Pennsylvania for 34 years. And many of my students were from Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, but at least a third of them were from very small rural towns in Pennsylvania. And Julie visited my class during the pandemic and spoke to these students. And there's no other way to say this. The students were mesmerized. And though it sounds cliché, many of their lives were changed by her reading and by her discussion. They asked lots of questions, all which Julie fielded deftly, forcefully, and kindly, all at the same time. And they left the Zoom room with this enlarged sense of history and social justice. And Julie, I don't know if you remember this, but there was one young man who stayed after for about 30 minutes in the Zoom class, and he had tears in his eyes. And he wanted to discuss a particular poem that Julie had talked about. And he vowed at the end that he was going to become a better person. That's how compelling this reading was. So I'm going to read two poems that I still kind of carry around in my head. The first is a call to lay down our own burdens and expectations in order to better serve others. And these poems are back to back in the book. What to Lay Down. Bobby pin, button, lozenge, dime, souvenir, emery board, obsession with time. Lay them down. Slip of paper with a phone number you can't remember whose. Your aunt's old postcard from Galapagos. Your inability to choose. Lay them down. The angry words you want to speak. The grudge you work so hard to keep. Your petty predilections, small and senseless premonitions, lay them down. The marriage you thought would last your whole life, dreams you once had as his faithful wife, I tell you, lay them down. Unburdened as you'll later be, relinquish one more thing, the birth name you gave your younger child, because now she says it's dead. Though it stretched the string between your heart and head, though it nearly snap in half, give it up, let it go, lay it down too. And the second poem I read on my radio show, which showcases Pennsylvania poets. And Julie characterizes this poem. I'd like to read her words. She says, I want to live and write in the realities we all face. And those realities are hard and sometimes harsh, yet also grace-filled. Easter snow is trying to get at the irresistible grace I believe God offers us. And here's Easter snow. May it fall, though it has fallen many times before. May it land upon the downy heads of dogs in the yard, cows in the field, and chickens squawking outside their coop. May it dissolve on tongues of children walking to school and arrive like a prophecy, fulfilling itself on the shoulder of factory workers in a line stretching out the door as they take long drags from their Pall Malls or talk to their spouses on their phones and wait to punch the clock. May it alight like the soft tap of dust we are made from on the backs of cable guys and cops, plumbers and professors, nurses and engineers heading to jobs in this common hour, toting coffee they brewed themselves, complaining about the weather. May it anoint the foreheads of the homeless on the streets, disabled daughters, trans children disowned and alone, single parents clutching coupons from SNAP, remind them all that God sits with us on the cold stones of our need. Beneath the sky, shedding its glory, piece by piece, and ease the yoke, convincing us to walk the earth like Marley's ghost, forever doing penance. Something else is in sight. Look, these fragile flurries voice their language in an opalescent code, which you and I and anyone can decipher, can know. I love that ending. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marjorie. And then finally, we have Tanya Runyon, who will read Legacy Museum on page 37 and end with White Women's Tears on page 31. Tanya is an NEA Fellow and author of several poetry collections, including What Will Soon Take Place, Second Sky, and 1,000 Vessels. Her guides how to read a poem, how to write a poem, and how to write a form poem are used in classrooms across the country. Her current writing can be read at her Substack publication, Poet Jesus.
Hi, congratulations, Julie. This is really exciting. So I've known you for 12 years, 13 years? Do you remember?
It's been a while.
Something?
Yeah. I think we first met when I brought you to Cedarville, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
So like,
yeah, it's been a while.
yeah. So I've always, of course, have thought that you're a wonderful poet, but just watching your evolution into a complete and total badass over those years it's just been an astonishing experience, and I just feel so lucky to know you.
You had a front row seat to it.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so I'm starting with Legacy Museum on page 37. Montgomery, Alabama. I made this proposition to the owners of the Negroes. If you'll give me Anarcha, is that how you say it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Betsy for experiment, I agree to perform no experiment or operation on either of them to endanger their lives. Wow, that's so big of him, isn't it? And will not charge a cent for keeping them, but you must pay their taxes and clothe them. The first patient I operated on was Tom Zimmerman's slave, Lucy. Anarcha became the subject of many experiments, the last of which was the 30th operation I performed on her, J. Marion Sims. Lucy, Betsy, and Anarcha, I've just learned about the scalpels you met and want your voices to harrow these United States. I've met 8 myself, all under the sweet sleep of ether withheld from you. So the ore that cut through my belly for cyst, hernia, and fibroid, blockage of my bowel, for ovary, gallbladder, and finally the source of so much joy and trouble, uterus, erased my pain and the broken organs I could live without. Deftly wielded, the steel did what it was made for. I never gave a thought to how your compulsory sacrifices birthed the science that delivered my life. I didn't even know until now. As I walk through this exhibit and the lacquered plaque teaches me your stories, how gynecology and its vital remedies came to be. I'd only had a vague awareness of these things. Raised white in an affluent South Jersey suburb, where I was taught about slavery and Jim Crow, but nothing about Harriet Jacobs or Sojourner Truth, convict leasing, or redlining, or you. Told nothing about masters bringing you to the table to kneel. Lean on your elbows, head in hands. What did I know of such diabolical sweat in that humid Alabama room, while I convalesced in my parents' Cape Cod, complete with master suite? Now I want to rage against the way Sims plotted his path and slipped his fingers into your sacred vault. How you had to feel every slice in your molecular core. How you reared up, bit into cloth. How your eyes must have begged him to stop. How you miraculously survived. I don't know how to handle the fact that over a century later, I benefit from his calculating breath that must have stolen yours over and over again without mercy or regret. I want to carve myself out of this story, but can't. Your truth has risen from the grave where clover, like scars, creep across the whole terrain. And then page 31, White Women's Tears. We have fallen at the slightest hint of black boy threat or smoky censure wafting its way from the candid mouth of any woman of color. We are reflex. We seek redress. We police pale cheeks congregating in the center of some nerve. Call us any damsel's names you wish, Sarah, Mary, Carolyn. In their distress, our dew drops from the glands of fear, clear as any whistle or stolen spotlight. Look how we whet the appetites of men we weren't designed to indict. Our sister is spit. We never run out.
So why did you choose those poems, Tanya?
The Legacy Museum, like how you expressed in the poem itself, I didn't know about this. I never learned about this.
Mm.
And I grew up in I didn't grow up in some, small rural Midwestern or Southern town. I grew up in Southern California. And I was just completely steeped in whiteness. The only thing we were taught is things were bad. Martin Luther King Jr. came along, fixed everything, the end. That was it. That was it. There were slaves. Abraham Lincoln fixed it, the end. Didn't learn any of these stories, and just the the way you write it with the personal tie, because I know about all the surgeries and just the very difficult health challenges that you've gone through, and then to see how that grew out of what happened to these women is the whole poem is just so striking for those reasons. And then White Women's Tears, oh wow. Like when I saw that poem, it's like she did it, she went there. You know? Took a really difficult concept to talk about openly. And it's just like I keep going over and over this poem, just like living in it. Like the form of it, the diction is just so stark and unflinching, and I feel called out by it, but it's like I keep coming back to it, and it's just it's stunning, and I'm really glad that you took it on.
Thank you. I have to give thanks to a really close friend who actually took me on a civil rights tour several years ago and took me to the Legacy Museum, took me to the National Museum of Peace and Justice. There's another poem actually titled that in the book. And she went through a year, and she's an African-American woman who is just, I think, one of the strongest and most loving people I've ever met. And she would say to me all this year, she's like, tell me about White Women's Tears. I mean, what is up with you guys? And we can have very frank discussions like that, which actually helped me write the poems, because I have this friend who we have just very frank, open discussions about. And I was like, let me look into that and I'll get back to you. And really the poem ended up being dedicated to her, because without her, I wouldn't have written it. I wouldn't have been really compelled to write it and inspired to write it and challenged to write it and really take it on and look at my own self too. Like, what are we doing? What are we white women doing? And the three women's names in the poem, Carolyn and Mary, and I forget the other one, Sarah. They're all the actual names of women whose tears led to lynchings. So including Mary Ball, who was the woman who cried rape here in Marion in 1930, and as was the case with both Sarah, which was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and resulted in the Tulsa Massacre, and then Carolyn, who resulted in the death of Emmett Till, the brutal murder of a 14-year-old boy. All of them recanted later and said, oh, I guess it wasn't rape, And as my friend who inspired the Erasure poem, Matthew, wrote, has explained, like, when you look at all the histories of lynchings, and if you ever get a chance to go to Alabama and go to the museum that Equal Justice Initiative has built under the leadership of Brian Stevenson, you find out people were lynched for the smallest of reasons, just looking the wrong way or standing on the wrong sidewalk. But there's many cases where maybe something happened, but if they could attach rape to it, that was it. That was the automatic, that made towns go crazy. So for instance, in 1930 in Marion, anywhere from 10 to 15,000 people attended that lynching. It was like going to a picnic. And again, it wasn't that long ago. It hasn't even been 100 years. It was 1930 in Indiana, a northern state. So yeah, I owe my friend Felicia Case, who's named in the book, for really challenging me on some of these things too, and really helping me write these poems. Margie, you did such a great job introducing and talking about the poems already, but if you have anything you want to add, you can, I guess.
The only thing I was going to add is both of those poems are ones that have just stuck in my head, and they come up when I'm just doing something else, this lay it down. Sometimes we get in the way of ourselves, right? And don't end up doing the right thing or helping others because we have all these other things coming, all these things coming up in our own life, and we just have to let them go, in order to move on, to more fully embrace everyone around us as well. And then I just love that the call to mercy and grace that is in that Easter snow poem.
I wrote that What to Lay Down poem when I was in a workshop with Carolyn Forche, of all people, right? That's a magnificent instructor, but she actually taught us about the unburdening poem, and I wrote that poem that week and got to share it with her, and she's like, "You wrote an unburdening poem. It's beautiful." And I was like, Carolyn Forche said it's beautiful, So, yeah. And Easter Snow, I will absolutely admit that Phil Levine's poem, What Work Is, was rattling around in my mind because it's one of my favorite poems. And so that line of workers, it's that What Work Is kind of inspired part of that poem. Just because I do think I'm just surrounded by people who work really, really hard and feel like they don't get much of a break, and don't really see much fruits of their labor. They just work and work and work and work and work and imagining just a light snow at Easter, which does happen in Indiana and in Ohio where I've lived before. My birthday's on April 21st. A couple of years ago, we got 5 inches of snow on April 21st. I was like, okay, this is a first. I've been alive for 5 decades, 6 decades, and now I have snow on my birthday. So, but yeah, just imagining the snow is kind of like a blessing at that time, which you can do because it's not a blizzard in January, right? So I had to think about that because it's like, well, if you're someone who's unhoused, snow is probably not going to be much of a blessing. So I had to kind of balance that, but it was an April thing. So
I remember having a sledding Easter one year growing up in Ohio, Julie. So
there it is.
happened,
Yeah, because you're from the
happened-
Cleveland area, right?
Yes. And I think over
Lake
COVID, we
effect.
actually had a day where it started snowing in May. So it's not completely out of the ordinary.
I'd like to come to the very first poem, the one we decided to start the book with, Slow Work.
Mm-hmm.
It's an amazing poem, remarkable poem. And I wonder if you might reflect a little bit, Julie, on the presence of the devil in this collection, in this poem, but appears elsewhere in the book.
Yes.
And then eventually, once you've talked about that a bit, I'd love you to read this poem and talk about it.
Okay. Yeah. I might be able to do, I don't know if this is okay, but can I read the poem first?
Yep, read it first.
Because then I can draw from it. This is one of the poems as I shared before, some of the poems I'd written quite a while ago. And so the time of the book really spans almost 20 years. But Slow Work's one of the newer ones. So, and it even has a date as kind of the epigraph. I wrote it on February 14th, 2025. Slow Work. I awoke to a song in the field, penny whistle beckoning in the pitch of expectation. Last evening's sleet sighing beneath the morning sun. Nothing melts this month, least of all hearts of ice. What else can I say? The devil does exist in the dreadful details. His heavy musk hangs in the air, clawing at us. He is father to many lies because his misery loves their company. But oh, that song. It lifts me not into rapture over the Valentine sky. This is not about transcendence, but into the slow work of the rabbit outside, foraging for food amid the shrubs, toting a twig back to its den. So yes, the devil shows up right away. And he is, right? The devil's in the details. And I think that's a lot of what the book's exploring metaphorically, whether you believe in a literal, Satan or not. The idea is that there is evil that exists in this world. And throughout literature, evil's always been personified in the figure of the devil, or at least in Western literature. Other cultures have other mythologies and legends and other kind of devil figures. And I really am. I'm exploring white supremacy as demonic, as evil, and really not mincing words about that. Really exploring that this is real darkness. And Ta-Nehisi Coates has written really beautifully, obviously in several books, but Between the World and Me, his first one, he makes a very strong point about how physical racism is, that it is brutal against the body. And these poems obviously explore that part of racism too, including the poem Tanya wrote. And that too is demonic, to be that brutal against bodies, to attack bodies, to lynch people, to use women as experiments and not give them the anesthesia that was available at the time, but was denied them. These are evil practices. And so for me, and obviously the title poem is called Devil's Backbone too. I feel like I've been navigating my entire life, riding this devil's backbone, which is, a Midwestern turn for a curvy or hilly road that's really dangerous to ride along. And I feel like that's kind of the story of our nation. Like, are there beautiful parts of our nation? Absolutely. I'm glad to be an American because I know I've enjoyed a lot of freedoms because of that. However, I've also ridden along that devil's backbone my whole life because I've been bathed in whiteness, conditioned by whiteness. I've benefited from whiteness. I still benefit from whiteness. And if I'm going to call myself a Christian, and I do, I am compelled to care for those who are vulnerable and those who are oppressed, because the God I worship has spoken throughout scriptures in myriad ways to say, I really care about the oppressed, and anyone who oppresses anyone else is evil. And there's a better way. There's a way of love. I was joking with my daughter, Ashley, earlier tonight because the two people who climbed to the top of the Empire State Building today, I don't know if you saw that in the news, they climbed to the top of the Empire State Building and he proposed to her and they got engaged, and they had a banner. And the banner said, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, but something along the lines of, peace will exist when the power of love becomes stronger than the love of power. And I thought, well, that's a great theme to write a book about too. And I feel like that in a lot of ways, these poems are interacting with that too, that, yeah, the devil is in the details. And I was playing a little bit in that poem too, because of course, Elon Musk was going crazy with Doge at the time I wrote it. So, his Musk hangs in the air. I am playing around a little bit there, but what really the tenor is look at that rabbit at the end, right? And just doing the work, just keep doing the work. And I'm surrounded by rabbits in this particular house where I live. So yeah, that's what's going on with the devil in the book.
Thanks.
Do you have any other questions about specific poems, book in general?
Well, I think you might as well follow that up by reading Devil's Backbone.
Okay, sure.
page 51 for those who
Yes.
have the book.
So just as a preface for this poem, I'll just explain, because the abbreviation CRT appears in the poem. And before all the anti-DEI rage that has been around the last couple of years, there was a rage against CRT, which stands for critical race theory. And so that's the reference in this poem. And this is a poem that's using phrases and words from America the Beautiful. So it also has an epigraph from Catherine Lee Bates' song, and it says, America, America, God mend thine every flaw. Devil's Backbone. Driving along the Devil's Backbone, I'm running late this October morning as this country roads hills and dips send my stomach rising and falling like an empire. Oh, okay, not that sensational, but still the news on the radio reports how one white man running for US Senate next door on Ohio's fruited plain rants against CRT, tweeting even at the children of Martin Luther King Jr. that he knows better than they what thoroughfare of brotherhood their father beat for freedom. Amid such noise from this less than noble nation, a beautiful squirrel darts from amber underbrush along the margins, campaigns for space before my Goodyear tires. It's no match for my speed here beneath the spacious sky, my blue CRV, my alabaster hands, not Jesus at the wheel. Once in another life, when I lived in that state, I voted for that guy. This morning, I am more hurry than heedful and crush the rural spine on Hoosier macadam. I tried to avoid it, but I am more than complicit, forever separated from its shadow that used to follow its body, ascending the oaks and maples now shedding their leaves. Does the squirrel cry on impact, though no one hears it? Not even me, since Green Day's now blaring on the radio. Charlatans, the candidate called Bernice King and Martin Luther King III, who lost their dad to a patriot dream dimmed by endless tears. Can you hear the sound of hysteria? Billy Joe Armstrong retorts. I ruminate as I go, muttering aloud to no one like, what else? An idiot. Blood under my nails like dirt, because once upon a time I was born into this supposed jubilee, because I can't seem to stop the killing.
Thank you for that, Julie. Well, I haven't been seeing any folks with a raised hand. If you do have a question or a comment that pops up, please feel free to just interject.
Why don't we circle back around to Angela and Matthew and Marjorie and Tanya for a last word on this book, on this project, on Julie, on your voice, your witness.
I guess I will just say that this was such, the word brave is often used in situations where maybe we shouldn't, but I think in this case that, especially in the times that we're living in now, it does take an act of bravery to write about things that are challenging. I often tell my students, when the world completely writes itself, maybe I can write about little bunny rabbits and flower gardens and such. But until that world reveals itself to me, I feel compelled to be in the weeds, to be in the dark places, to go and shed light so that others who may not even be aware that there's a need for them to see certain things, to shine that light. And I appreciate the fact that there's so many different things that you could have chosen to write about, Julie, safer topics, to be honest, topics that would have opened doors for you to go into spaces without ever having to worry about what the questioners were going to ask or if someone was going to be offended. But you chose to stand solidly in a difficult space. So I'm just very appreciative that our paths did cross, and that your work now is going to do so much for the world in ways that you can't even imagine today. And I'm grateful that we were able to be on this journey a little bit together.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, Angela.
So echo those sentiments. When I previous employment, I used to work in a very white school district, and what's the name of the class was race, class, and gender that was taught. I did not teach that class, and often students would ask, "Well, why aren't you teaching that class? Like, why is this other person teaching that class?" Those who've read a lot of my work, I deal a lot in these very same issues, and so my students would say, "Why aren't you teaching it?" And a friend of mine who was a nice white lady was teaching the class, and one of the things I would often say to them is, "One, you don't want me teaching this class because I don't want to get all the parent phone calls. They can read my literature." The second thing was that how much more powerful it was for my white students to hear the same things I was saying from a white woman who could be their mother. And like the number of times they would come to me and say, "Hey, you were talking about X, Y, and Z in class, and then in her class she was talking about the same things. Did you guys plan that?" And it's like, no, this is just history. This is just the world. Like, these are just things that you should know. While I was reading through this collection, that kept crossing my mind, the idea that there are so many poems that aligned with things that I've written, and like they're like we were there in so many ways. And I was thinking just how powerful it is that some people will read this and they can hear it from your voice, but they can't hear it from it. They could hear it from you and accept it or be open to the conversation, which is so very important when it's conversations that need to be had. And one of the notes that I wrote in my own, because I printed out my original version where I printed it out and was writing my notes in it, was how you gave voice to people without speaking over them or for them, which is a very, very difficult thing to do, and you did it brilliantly. And so, yes, I'm very, very, very happy that this is in the world.
Thank you. That's high praise coming from you, so thank you.
I again would echo what's said before me, and I'm just confident that you're going to be working hand to hand with this literature that you've produced, but also you're going into the schools, you're going into the churches, you're going into the community centers, and you're already doing all that good work of talking about the same issues. And you know, you handle it so well. You're very good at standing your ground, but saying in a way that people want to listen and want to hear more, and then kind of dive into what you've written too, as a kind of companion to what you're already doing when you're talking with people and having these hard conversations and these important conversations. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Margie.
Yeah, Julie, I've just been really inspired by your passion, and I learned a lot from this book. I mean, I've learned a lot from you, period. But this book will continue to be mind-changing and heart-changing for people. And I especially love that you are saying these things in the name of Christ and your faith, because unfortunately that has been used to justify events that are literally the opposite of of what Christ stands for. So to me, that it's just a triumph. So thank you for writing it.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you, because your work has influenced and shaped my work. Your support kept me going. And Marjorie especially, she and I are kind of poetry buddies. So we not only communicate all the time about each other's lives, but we're always sending poems to each other and saying, "Can you read this? And am I way off the mark here?" And so she supported me and helped me with a lot of these poems, but a lot of other people did too, and just gave me a lot of really wonderful feedback that helped. But thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Marjorie. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Angela, for being here tonight, and for just supporting this work, and for your kind words. Sometimes I feel like saying, "Oh, shucks," but which is very corny. But I do appreciate very much everything you've said, and your support and your participation tonight. So thank you so much, because this took your time, And Angela and Matthew, you wrote blurbs, and that took a lot of time too. So thank you. And thank you to Sean Thomas Darty and Shane McCrae as well, who wrote endorsements, but just couldn't be here tonight. So
Thanks, Julie, for bringing this book into the world. It's humbling to read your poems. My wife and I have been talking about what we want to do this 4th of July. We're going to hear monstrous lies from the mall in Washington, from President Trump, who seems to believe that any criticism of the United States or of our history, of our long history, is unpatriotic. And a book like this reminds us that, in fact, the truest patriotism stares at the difficult truths without looking away,
right.
And says, we can do better than this. We must do better than this. So on this 4th, we'll be at the No Kings rally in the morning. I'm going to take a couple of these poems to read them to a very large crowd that gathers every week. And I would encourage all of you on this 4th to do what you already know to do, which is to deepen your resolve, to commit our path as a people, to actually live into the dream that all people, men, women, of every color and race and religion, are created equal, and to know the burden, the joyful burden that places on us as a democracy. So thank you all. And Julie, thank you especially tonight.
And thank you, Mark. You were my editor, and you helped me get this whole thing together. And like, obviously, I couldn't have done it without you. And thank you to Wild House for bringing this book out and publishing it. And thank you to Ava, because your support's been amazing. We have sometimes emailed numerous times a day, and she has always been quick to respond and so helpful. So thank you to everyone. And thanks to those of you who came. I know a lot of people have had to leave already, but to those of you who stayed till the bitter end, thank you.
Yes. Thanks very much, Julie. I just dropped a link to the book in the chat here if you're interested in reading it. We have it in paperback. And if anyone has any connections to the Cleveland, Ohio area, Julie is going to be appearing at Visible Voice Books on July 19th, which is a Sunday at 1 p.m. Visible Voice Books is a very progressive and just absolutely gorgeous bookstore in Northeastern Ohio. So if you or a loved one lives there, I highly encourage you to go see Julie read live. I think we are kind of coming to a natural end here. So I think this is a good time to wish everyone a good night. Thanks to you all.
Thank you, Ava. Thanks everyone for everything.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
all.